Bueno, buenos días. Buenos días a todas, a todos. Gracias por sumarse. Hola, Susana, ¿cómo
Buenos
estás?
días, muy
Hi,
buenos días.
Slobodan.
Hi.
Bueno, como siempre, buenos días a todos. Ahí los estamos leyendo en el chat. Hoy tenemos una reunión espectacular que va a ser en inglés, ya aviso, pero solamente queríamos, bueno, simplemente contarles a los primeros que se suman en la reunión hoy que esta es una reunión de las comisiones de estudio de la Asociación Argentina de Ética y Compliance. Nosotros como asociación tenemos más de 15 años trabajando en Argentina con el objetivo de promover la adopción e inspirar el uso de las mejores prácticas en materia de ética y cumplimiento, entendiendo que las prácticas organizacionales tienen que ajustarse a las normas y a las regulaciones aplicables, como también a los principios éticos y de buenas prácticas de gobierno, control y transparencia. Nacimos con el lema de que lo correcto debe primar sobre lo conveniente. Y en los últimos años, además, acuñamos otro, que es que somos apasionadas y apasionados por hacer lo correcto. Como asociación tenemos una certificación internacional de ética y cumplimiento que la damos junto con la Universidad de UCEMA. Llevamos 23, esta es la 24 edición que está comenzando ahora en unos días, y más de 2.200 graduados SEX. Esta asociación tiene, además de esta comisión, tenemos 10 comisiones más de estudio, en total somos 11. Para los que les interesan, data privacy y ética digital, o compliance y antitrust, o compliance en la industria financiera y fintech, o compliance penal estratégico, o compliance y sector público, o compliance en salud, o gestión de fraude corporativo, o sistemas de gestión de compliance, o compliance ASG, sostenibilidad, o diversidad y cultura ética, los invitamos, por supuesto, a sumarse a nuestras reuniones. Tenemos un club del Compliance Officer solo para los profesionales SEC graduados, que se reúne creo que los últimos miércoles de cada mes, donde discutimos todas las novedades de la agenda de compliance en el día a día. Tenemos una iniciativa que se llama Connecting Dots, que es como una suerte de bolsa de trabajo donde uno puede postear opciones de búsqueda laboral o también puede hacer, o sea, opciones de ofertas de puestos laborales, como también buscar trabajo, y no hace falta ser socio de la asociación para poder hacerlo. Tenemos también una iniciativa que se llama Supervalores, que es que hace un tiempo definimos que estaba muy bien hablar entre nosotros de compliance, pero teníamos que hablar con otras generaciones, con las generaciones que van a ser el futuro, y entonces desarrollamos esta iniciativa para trabajar con chicos de primaria, de quinto, sexto, séptimo grado, a través de juegos y empezar la discusión acerca de los valores, la anticorrupción, etc. Tenemos también encuentros, todos los años hacemos a mitad de un encuentro público-privado, el de este año fue el número 13, y este año, fin de año, vamos a tener el 10º Congreso Internacional que hacemos todos los años a fin de año. Bueno, los invitamos desde ya a sumarse a la asociación, a seguirnos en redes, a ser miembros y asociarse y formar parte de esta comunidad con nosotros. Y ahora sí, sin más preámbulos, quiero que pasemos a la reunión de hoy y decirles que vamos a cambiar a inglés. We will switch languages today and we welcome Slobodan, and of course it's a pleasure to be with you today.
Okay, well, good morning to everyone. Today, we will present the concept of behavioral interventions and explore how they can be used to advance integrity in public or corporate governance. Particular emphasis will be placed on examining how behavioral measures can be employed to foster compliance and strengthen investigative functions.
And I want to welcome and introduce our speaker today, who's joining us right from York in England, who is Mr. or Dr. Slobodan Tomić. Slobodan, and I will refer to you like Slobodan because we have already talked a few times, is an associate professor in public policy and public management at the University of York in the UK, specializing in public integrity and anti-corruption policies and institutions. He has taught and published widely on topics related to the fight against corruption, regulatory enforcement, oversight policies and institutions, and organizational ethics. In his academic and professional career, Dr. Tomić has engaged in consultancy and research with a number of international, regional, and national organizations focused on shaping public integrity processes. His empirical research and field work has spanned various regions in both the developed and developing world, including several Latin American states. Dr. Tomić holds a PhD in political science from the London School of Economics, where he also obtained a master's in public policy and administration and a master's in research methods. So it's really a pleasure to have you here. And as I have explained, Slobodan, today we have a community of compliance professionals, not only in Argentina, but in the region, interested in learning about behavior, and you have quite a lot to teach us today. So my first questions, and we have many, but the first is, what are behavioral interventions? Can you briefly describe different types of behavioral interventions?
Yes, so thanks for the introduction, and hello and welcome from York on my part here, early afternoon. So thanks for the opportunity, and yeah, just briefly, this will be structured around, I guess, 4 or 5 parts. So the first one is about what behavioral interventions are. So I'll try, I hope technology is not going to betray me. So I'll try just to share a few slides here, but I'll be shutting them down along the way. So I want to maintain direct contact. So just kind of for illustration purposes, right? So very briefly here, let me see if this is going to work. Right, share screen, and then let me see slideshow. So I hope you see this, right?
Yes.
Okay, so very briefly, before saying what behavioral interventions are, I just want to give you 2 brief examples just to kick off. So the first one is from the Tax Revenue Office here in the UK, from the mid-2010s. So you can see this graph. So on the left-hand side was a usual letter sent to people reminding them that they need to pay for their taxes, right? So the purpose was, all right, so we want to inform you, we want to obtain as much compliance as possible. So as many people to do their part of the obligation on time as possible. On the right-hand side, you see the response when the letter was slightly changed, tweaked, saying something along the lines, 95% of people, they pay for their taxes on time. I don't remember the exact wording and the figure, but it was about referring to other people, you know, doing their part on time and being very, you know, conscious citizens. So you can see that the percentage of taxpayers paying on time was significantly higher when the letter was tweaked, or when the letter was included reference to others in the community, right? So that's one example. And then the other example, and my favorite, you know, Tversky Kahneman in the early 1980s. Some of you have probably heard of those authors. So kind of, you know, the famous Thinking Fast and Slow book later on published kind of later on, and the author is getting the Nobel Prize. Anyway, so going back to this example, so patients were offered the option of having a surgery, all right? So when you tell them, and those were not easy surgeries, so when they were told, right, 90% of the patients, they survived the surgery, you see on the left-hand side, how many of them said, yes, I'll go for that surgery, dear doctor, okay? But when they were told 10% of the patients choosing the surgery died, you see a significantly less, 58%. So 14% less people said, I'll go for this surgery. Now, the difference there is no difference. So 90 versus 10%. All right, so 90% of people survive, 10% die. But if you frame the wording and the choice that they're presented with, they behave differently. They take different choices, right? So let me now stop screen sharing. So the purpose of this was, of those two very brief examples, was, the way we communicate something, it affects people's choices. So, and this is what behavioral interventions are about. So, in their essence, those are very soft mechanisms. Let's call them tweaks that we can implement to affect people's choices. So why are they interesting? Because they are very cheap and they might be effective. So they can lead to significantly different outcomes. Now they're being used for various purposes in different policy fields. Tax collection, law enforcement, integrity policy, welfare policy, various sorts of choices in education. Speaking of health policy, like swaying people, what sorts of foods to eat, how to behave in their daily lives, trying to nudge them into healthier lifestyles. So all of those are some of the applications of behavioral interventions, right? And you've probably come across the word nudge. So that's one word or phrase, let's say, nudging people, that exemplifies behavioral interventions. It's one of the several possible sorts of behavioral interventions, but quite often it is equaled in popular discourse with behavioral interventions. So briefly, that was kind of a very short two very short examples about those. Now, what are BIs about? So BI stands for behavioral intervention. So if I use that abbreviation BI, so please don't be puzzled. Yeah, right. Behavioral interventions, or nudge. Let's say nudge. Simplified. Right. So let me go back to the slides, and I want to show you something here about human biases. So basically, human behavior is prone to biases, so different sorts of biases. So we do not act as rational beings. We do not weigh up different options. We don't pause and say, well, I will work out how I need to behave in this situation. And there are many reasons for this. It would be too time-consuming, costly, cognitively too burdening, and many other reasons. But basically, if we want, kind of in a very simple language, if we want to divide all those various biases, we might say there are four types, four categories. One is about how we decide. The other one is about what we notice. The third one is how others influence our behavior, how they sway us, and also how we reason. Right. So this is a very, I'm not a fan, let me say immediately, of kind of cramped text on slides. So please do not, start reading through this. I'll send you through the presentation and you'll see this. But I just wanted to, just to show you. So on the left-hand side, you've got four types of biases. That's precisely how we decide what we notice, how others sway us, and how we reason. So in other words, in a more professional language or kind of academic language, let's say, those are called decision-making biases, attention memory biases, social conformity biases, reasoning belief biases. You can see some of the explanations, so no need to read through all of them, but I'll just give a few examples. So you've seen it on the first two slides, so you can, I guess, even now guess what they are about. But let's say loss aversion. So, you hate losing more than you enjoy winning. So that's one thing. Or let's say framing effect. your judgment about a certain thing, kind of a decision you want to take, it depends on the words that are used to describe that. So I've seen kind of mortality or survival rates. That's one example, but it's not the only one example. Anchoring, the first thing that I tell you affects how you will perceive things later on when we mention other things. So if I say a high number, later on I might sway you into thinking in higher number terms. So for instance, there's one very interesting example, but I'll come back to that later on. Right, so you can see here all sorts of biases, so different biases, and they're working on their niche. And people are susceptible to those biases, and that's why they make decisions they make that might not be the most rational decisions. So just as shortcuts. Right, so I'll stop here now, and I'll come back to this slide later on. So the purpose of behavioral interventions is, it is twofold. Well, we can utilize some of those biases, and we can steer the way you behave, and we can steer your choices. As you've seen on the first two examples, the first two graphs, all right? So if you want people, to be more responsible for tax payments, and even more truthful, you tell them, people from your community, they tend to pay their taxes on time. Look at how many people do so. And this would be the third type of bias that I just mentioned, social conformity bias. Right, so-called social proof. You copy what others do. Or also decision-making biases, loss aversion of mortality, survival rate, or any other thing. So, for instance, we might say, well, if you don't exercise today, you will lose, on average, 0.5 days of your life, for instance. So reframe it as a loss, and you will be more inclined to do that, because it's not about you might gain something. It's more about playing the scare game. Let's say in a very simple language. So behavioral interventions are nothing else than trying either to utilize those biases to play into the advantage of those creating a policy. So trying to achieve the policy goal, healthier lifestyles, kind of less corruption, less neglect when it comes to to tax payments or any other commitments towards the state, society, or trying to fix those biases where they exist. So some people do not behave in the ways we would like them to behave. Maybe not because they are calculators, amoral calculators, because they want to cheat, but maybe because they're just susceptible to various things, to various biases. So one of those, let me now show you 4 sorts of behavioral interventions briefly. So again, slide sharing will be again up. So you can see here, again, lots of text, but just please focus on the titles here. So there are 4 types of behavioral interventions, right? So let's say the first one is pro-inertia. Right, so playing the status quo card, which means what? So people are prone to staying with the status quo, right? Rather than opting for a decision that means change. The other one is framing and motivation. So through wording, or we shape how people perceive value or act. The third one is anchoring. So we sow certain reference points, and then the way you decide, it's by comparing your choice to the with those reference points. We'll come back to this later on. And boosts or capacity building. So let me just say a few words about the pro-inertia. So behavioral interventions, you've probably come across those, sometimes intuitively noticing them, sometimes maybe deliberately. So the default option is one of those. And what does the default option mean? It means if I want you to make a certain choice, let's say B, to donate your organs, for instance, to make a pledge that you want one day to donate your organs to be donated to other people in need of this. So we do the opt-out option. I guess you've all heard of that opt-out option. It means the default choice is you are an organ donator. Now, you can, the opt-in option. So that's the default choice, right? So all the citizens in your country, for instance, if a law is adopted, they are considered to be organ donators. Now, you can opt out of this scheme, but you need to make an effort. So you need to opt out. You need to express that intention. It's not the other way around. It's not if you want to donate, you go and kind of file a form and saying I'm in. It's the other way around. And the empirical evidence shows for whatever option, whatever policy, the opt-in works quite well. So the response rate eventually is much higher. So many more people stay with the status quo. But if you're kind of against it, still there is a choice for you. So this is not a restrictive policy solution. So we're not forcing someone into something. We are just kind of nudging them towards making that choice. I guess this is clear, right? Should be very simple. And there are other behavioral interventions falling under the first category. So pro-inertia BIs. So one of those is simplification, and that's quite intuitive. So basically, you make things simpler because then it looks like you need to make much less effort to understand what it is about, but also it requires the least amount of deviation from the status quo for you to complete that. So friction reduction as well, and also structuring choices. It's another type of a pro-inertia BI, meaning if you need to do a complex task or a series of steps or something that in fact is quite an endeavor, basically if it's broken down into a number of simpler steps, it will lead more people to take that action. Do you want any questions so far, or you want me to?
No, I sorry, Slobodan, I was sorry to interrupt, but I was just going to tell you that we in Argentina, our donation act is exactly this opt-in structure. As you say, we are all by default, we are all donators, unless you specifically indicate you don't want to. This is something that we've changed in the last years, and I think it's part of like a movement, a worldwide movement, right? Because it was very proved that this opt-in, opt-out is really a very good tool in applying this policy.
Yeah. So that's along the lines of the whole BI movement. And it's a very simple and effective solution. It's not without its criticisms, but we can come back to them later. So just trying kind of now to strip it down to the very essence, right? So yeah, good to know. So kind of joining the club in terms of kind of organ donations, kind of worldwide trend. Right. So if we move on to framing motivation, loss aversion. So if you want to say, well, if you fail to do so, those are the costs. So you will be, having some costs or consequences that might spur people into action. Those who usually are non-compliant or neglectful, and so on. Or also, if you want to go for the social, let's say, conformity nudge, if you remember the previous slide. So you do positive framing. Well, be like those 95% of people who've complied, right? So, or all your neighbors in the area, they've complied. Why wouldn't you? I'll show you later on a few more graphs, so you will see how it comes across, how it plays out across different policy areas and what the gains are. And you can see here other examples for framing and motivations. Let's say commitment consistency, it's quite interesting. So, you know, and there are many studies confirming this effect. So if we want you to stick with a certain form of behavior, let's say I will be upholding, you know, the ethical principles in my work in my organization as a senior manager. If you're given a form, a commitment to sign or an oath, the evidence shows you will be more ethical on average. All other factors being controlled for. So why? Because people, they want to act consistently with their prior acts or pledges, right? So here, in terms of consistency, it reduces friction, and so on and so on. So there is a very rich catalog of BIs, but basically those all fall under framing and motivation. Anchoring, let's say, so basically you have a reference point, all right? So, you know, for instance, today you're dealing with cases. If you're a case worker, and you know that, for instance, you don't know how many cases your colleagues complete every day. And for instance, you complete 21 cases as a case worker. But, you know, all of a sudden you find out that the average number of completed cases by your colleagues is 16. So what do you think most people will do when they find out they're way above the average of their colleagues? So yeah, most likely, you know, if they have 17, 18, kind of the other day, they will be saying, well, that's still slightly more than average. I'm fine. You know, I'm on track. There is no need to push hard, for instance. So that's the anchoring effect. Or the other way around. If you say, well, those best performing in your department, if they do 26, 27, well, you know, you might be thinking, I'm still kind of falling behind. I want to catch up with those best performers, so I'll try to increase it from 21 to 24. So a very simple example for the anchoring effect. And we can talk about the other effects, so we are constrained by time, so I'm conscious of that. And boosts and capacity building, so those are not simple nudges, they are called so-called boosts. When we basically train people in critical thinking about where different biases might lie and how they can deal with them. So some of you might have undergone unconscious bias training, for instance. So we might harbor certain you know, biases towards various social groups, but it's like gender groups, females, for instance, tend to be disadvantaged in interviews. And this is a very much not even a rational a decision at the rational level, but it's just kind of a sort of bias, or towards certain minorities that they might not be as effective as, you know, members of the majority population, or, you know, kind of rejecting them might not be a big deal in the interview and so on, let's say a job interview. So, you know, if you go through this unconscious bias training as one example of the fourth type of behavioral intervention, you will be put in a position where you would much better understand how it might creep up, so unconscious bias and how to deal with it, and what you can implement in your work to make sure that you are de-biased. So for instance, before making your decision, you might go through a checklist. Someone might ask you a number of questions. Are you sure you're not judging this person based on their social belonging, the group they're coming from? Are you sure that you're weighing up only objective evidence, things like that? If anyone has a question, please feel free to interrupt me. Ask the question. I can't see the chat box now as I speak. Or Mariana, you can, you know, if there is any intervention, please do so. But basically, more or less, this is very briefly about what behavioral interventions are about and kind of some of the main categories of BIs.
And I think they're very, very interesting, and it's well, to me, because I come from the law, I'm a lawyer, and so by default we tend to think that we can order behavior just by putting in written whatever you have to do, no? So behavior actually comes, to my perspective, to teach us how many other things you can do actually that really work or not. I mean, and this is perhaps our next question, and I will leave it to Susan to do it. But it's amazing how many things now we have learned that really seem to work better than just putting things in written, okay? I don't know, Susan, if you want to catch up on this.
For me, as a doctor, it's the opposite. Because people come and I say, please, don't eat more salt. And I say, okay, doctor. And they go back home and they buy salt and they use salt, okay, salt, for instance. Or we say, don't smoke, and they smoke. And the problem is that sometimes the doctor who says, don't smoke, is smoking. So for me, as a doctor, this is amazing because we try to use this some of the categories you mentioned and the tools to try to people make better decisions about their health. And we see it every day. So about how we explain, how we say, and what do they do finally. It's very interesting, Slobodan, very interesting. It's great. Well, going to the next question. In practice, what are their effects? Are there studies that measure effects of these trials and studies? How do you measure them?
Yeah, thanks. Just, the smoking example, it just reminded me of something. So let me very briefly. So if you remember the slide, I'll share again it before moving on to the effects. So keeping in mind the question. So if you remember this slide here, so if you look into the second category, attention memory biases, under C, so recency, okay? And you see the explanation, you give too much weight to the latest info. So what do people, so when you say, well, don't smoke because of those and those reasons, right? But over time, this effect dissipates. So it's not a recent thing. So someone has been taught something, but many other things have happened in the meantime. So that's why reminders, and that's why all those horrible pictures of people suffering on cigarette boxes, packages, right? Because whenever you take it, it becomes the most recent thing that you see, and it keeps repeating over time. And plus the second mechanism is combined here, it's salience, right? You focus on the most eye-catching thing, and here it's in a brutal sense. So that is actually in itself, if you've seen on kind of cigarette packages, boxes, those horrible pictures, kind of people's kind of like black smoked lungs, kind of people with cancer and so on. So that is a BI, actually, behavioral intervention, one of those that most of you are familiar with, right? So we can find already examples. Now you've asked me about the effects, right? So I'll show you now a number of graphs, and those will speak for themselves. But let me just first kind of say kind of just a few sentences about kind of how do we measure. So we can measure the effects, kind of in different ways. It depends on what we are interested in. So one thing is, financial effects, right? So you want to save money, or you want to collect more money. So obviously, for tax collection, that's one thing. Or you want kind of to look into people's well-being. So health outcomes. How long they live. So that's one thing. How do they feel? So the quality of life. Do they suffer from various diseases, do they have multiple diseases or not? So the quality of their life. And also subjective feelings. You've got different surveys. So that might be another thing. But also there could be things like some of the consequences. So let's, if you speak about public integrity or corporate integrity, so the level of trust, that could be another thing that we might want to measure. Of course, we might measure like levels of corruption or kind of trust that the system is honest and things like that. Or let's say we might measure in terms of integrity, we might measure the number of proceedings that had to be launched because of non-compliance. So if it goes down as a result of a measure, behavioral intervention, we might say, well, many people now comply, so there is less need, for kind of case openings and so on. So there are all sorts of kind of measurements that could be taken. And it depends on the policy area. So we can speak later on, during Q&A about specifically, compliance officers and investigators. So how it plays out in public sector context and private sector context, how we can measure it. But now going back to the question about the effects. So you can see here one graph. So it was about kind of death, unpaid debt for kind of medical care. So you can see here, here the intervention was, let's do the letter very simple. So let's send to the people a letter with much more simple language. And you see the difference is almost 20% kind of in terms of kind of compliance participation. And also people, so there are other examples of people, making an appointment with a doctor and they're not turning up, which is very expensive for the healthcare system, right? Because you use up someone else's slot and resources and you don't turn up. And same effects. If you use a simpler language, but also if you use some of the other BIs, if you say, well, if you don't turn up, this is how you're going to harm your neighbor or someone else who is in desperate need for support. Here's another example for tax credit debt. Letters that are too generic, that are not personalized, personalized letters are those that use some of your personal details, you being addressed by your name, for instance, or if there is a clue relating to your neighborhood or even your profession, right? Here the response rate is much higher, again, 20%, which is quite high. So this is one of the studies where the effects were being measured in the UK. Similar effects are across other countries. In the 2010s, especially in the 2020s, more and more governments, or let's say behavioral insights teams that they've set up, and this is quite a trend across the world, they implement an intervention and they measure the effects. So those are some of the examples. Many of them are from the UK, but you have from across the world similar effects confirmed. This is for courts, right? When people do not turn up, and then they get reminders, and with the reminder, kind of text message saying, "Oh, you're supposed to turn up," and especially if it's personalized. Your name is given and the amount of fine, for instance, that you are expected to pay, and so on. You see again quite a big difference, 20% in terms of compliance participation. And you will see later on there are different ways of personalizing. Some are more effective, others less effective. Organ donation, you can see. Look at the difference here. So if you do the opt-in thing, 20%, only every fourth person goes for the opt-in option. And this is back from 2003. Now we can expect a slightly higher because awareness has been increased about the importance. Although people are now busier, so it might deter some people, who want to do, especially if they need to turn up in person and do checkups and so on. But if you do the opt-out, 85% This is if you want to get out of the scheme, but you're automatically enrolled. Saving plans for your pension as well. We all want people to be enrolled in various pension plans, right? And you can see the difference between the opt-in and opt-out option. Again, 34%. It's enormous. If you sign an honesty pledge, your reports will be more truthful, and the difference is 20%. Let's say kind of more than 50%. The majority of people, they will be reporting in a more truthful manner than those who do not sign this pledge. Even if there is no severe sanction for breaching the pledge, right? You're not going to go to prison. There is no kind of criminal fine. Student loans.
Sorry, Slobodan. If you just can go back to the pledge, the honesty pledge, correct? If I let me correct, if I understand it correctly, this is when you have to submit sort of let's say a reply or a declaration or whatever. So you just put at the very beginning that you have to be very honest, sort of, and then you start to filling on the questionnaire or whatever, the form, and deliver it, and then the ratio is much better than when you don't put anything at the very beginning. That would be it.
Yeah, so there are different. There were different measures tried with honesty pledges. This one specifically, this evidence is for when you sign an honesty pledge at the beginning and at the end. So
at the beginning.
Yes. So when you're at the beginning, then you see how many people were truthfully reporting, and when you sign it in the end. So, and why is this the case? So I'll try to run you back. I'll try to run you back all the way to the mechanisms, because you're framed here, but also in terms of recency. So let's go back here to the mechanisms. Okay, so we can say recency under C. So you're first, but also you're anchored. So the first mechanism under C and the second mechanism under C. Attention, memory biases, decision-making biases. So for instance, so you can see you are being anchored in terms of, your reference point becomes, I need to be truthful here and honest. And plus, it is a very recent thing that sticks in your mind. And therefore, the way you report or can answer the questions and so on and so on, it will tend to be much more honest. Not for everyone, but for a significant portion of people, it will have an effect, right?
All right.
Now, there were measures where you only sign a pledge, and versus you don't sign any pledge, not even at the end. And then the difference is stark, right?
Yeah.
So the difference is stark. And also there were people, so here people were told you will sign a pledge at the end, but you might not even be told. Then even kind of a lower percentage of people, they report truthfully. Student payback loans, you can see the effects here and so on and so on. Local taxes. Okay, so those are the effects. So let me just wrap up. Most of those BIs, they have an effect. Sometimes they have a stronger effect, sometimes they have a lesser effect, but they do, in most cases, they do have effects if implemented appropriately, right? Across different types of BIs across different policy sectors, trying to trigger different mechanisms and biases that we've covered in the first part of the presentation. Right, so that's about the effects. Any questions or any comments?
Yeah, there are many comments on the chat. I just will read a few so you have a flavor, because I know when we're talking and you're presenting, it's very hard to also read the chat. So we read Alexander Vidal, for example, said that thoughts can be chosen but not feelings. And sometimes the way we approach the employees is about what they think and not what they feel about what they do. Then Analia says, the brain does not register the word no. It's better to use positive sentences to ensure compliance. Okay, you agree. Then F. Rios, I don't know who if, okay, F. Rios says it's very interesting to rethink. Fabian, okay, sorry, Fabian. Flavia, oops, estoy sorda. It's very interesting to rethink these concepts and motivate us to think outside the box. We shouldn't just rely on the fact that a written policy means compliance, which is absolutely true. I totally agree with you, Flavia, because lawyers tend to think that most of the time. Elizabeth Petrega says, I'm following the session, very interesting. I work in corporate internal control and ethics. I believe we need to rethink our communications on risk management. We can raise awareness on many topics, but how can we be more effective in people compromising to action? And Flavia says, I can see right now the personalization of letters, mails, SMS to offer a service, to claim a debt. I repeat that it's a challenge to think out this way in our daily routine. So, and we have a couple of questions that I'm just leaving to the end for the Q&A session.
Yeah. Do you want me to pick up on some of those?
Yeah, of course. Feel free to.
Right. Shall we move on, or
yeah, let me just if you, because I'm reading if there is another comment. We were thinking in terms of continuing with the presentation is how do organizational settings and other variables shape prospects for the effective use of behavioral interventions? So
yeah, so I will just briefly, in the interest of time. So, right, so the question is, and I think a few questions touched upon this. Okay, so what to use when in terms of kind of, for our compliance efforts and the context we work in, or in general. So there was one question I've just seen, what are the kind of mediating factors and so on impacting the effect? Now, let's say briefly, so there are 3 or 4 types of mediating factors. One is the organizational, the other one is social or contextual, a third one is a kind of personal characteristics. Let's say there is another one, but let's keep it simple for those 3 main. So what does it mean? So certain effects will have certain BIs will have better effects, stronger effects, if they fit with the organization. What does it mean? So for instance, just a few examples of the fitness with the organization. If you want to implement a nudge, if there's one channel of communication, for instance, people log into the internal portal of their organization. They want to look into cases to decide which one to take up and so on. And you want to send a reminder, for instance, or you want to anchor a reference point for them. Look, you need to catch 3 cases of cheating today. Misconduct, corporate misconduct, whatever. You leave it in that system. You don't leave it outside the system, and you don't communicate separately. You don't put up a poster in the hall, for instance. Just a very simple example of the organizational fit that needs to be achieved. So it needs to be incorporated into routine case handling. So that's one of the things. Needs to be part of the internal routines, IT systems and systems beyond IT. Also, they need to be implemented well on time. So, for instance, let's say for tax letters, studies have shown if you send them well ahead of time, so before the deadline, and if you can send them again and again, so for a second and third reminder, the compliance rate will drastically go up compared to a situation where you send them, let's say, 7 days before the deadline. So it depends on your internal processes and deadlines, and how much time people have to correct for their non-compliance and so on. It depends. It's from policy area to policy area. But the organizational fit and the procedural fit is very important. So you need to pay attention to that. You also need, in terms of culture, you need to pay attention to the local culture, whether it's your institutional culture or societal culture. So, for instance, you have countries with high trust settings or organizations, and actually, I have a study back from 2020. If I remember well, Journal of Behavioral Public Administration, they published it. So in Estonia, in the context where there was high trust, you send a reminder saying, we want to help you comply. It's a high trust setting. It will elicit greater compliance and better response. It will resonate with the employee. So if, as a government, if you send something, we are a government, we are collecting conflict of interest, personal assets declarations. You work, I don't know, in the national bank, you work, in another public institution, we need you to have these asset declarations about the time. We want to help you. The purpose of these letters and reminders sent to you is to help you do that well on time in the correct manner, submit the right information. But if it's a low trust setting, they will react in a different way. They will be suspect, even if you threaten them. So if you say, we will catch you if you don't, if you leave out some important information, people will be having lower compliance rates. And that's why important, for instance, for field work officers to tailor their message to the local culture. It depends on the country, but it depends on the policy field. It's not the same, dealing with people from high trust environments with high human capital, and some policy sectors where cheating and misconduct are quite common. So that needs to be taken into account. The culture we can talk about later on some other examples. Also, social norms. So there is one interesting example. So I'll tell you, in terms of how in terms of how anchoring can work. So sometimes if you say we want you to use certain ways of energy consumption. So we want you to reduce your energy consumption. Okay, to have a lower footprint. If you say, well, your neighbors do this, and look at how good they are, and if you spend more energy than them, on average, you will be more likely to reduce your energy consumption. But there might be a boomerang effect as well. So if you're way below them, you might say, well, my energy consumption is this low, whereas the average in the area is so much higher. Well, they're not making enough effort, so I will be spending a bit more energy and so on. So it might backfire. So you need to know the local context and culture and how people could be motivated. Also, you have societies with collective cultures and individual cultures. So if you look at the World Values Survey, the Hofstadter survey and so on, you can see which countries are which. So they're empirical studies. I'm not going to be naming cultures, but in countries with individualist cultures, your BI need to say something along those lines. If you do this, you will have personal gain, which will be this high. But in collective collectivist cultures, you say, for instance, if you do this, your community will benefit, the society, the nation will benefit. So here, the response rate will be much more strongly motivated. So you need to know the culture. So there was this example with public health campaigns for hand washing. If you say, well, in collectivist societies, if you wash your hands regularly, you will protect others. In collectivist societies, the response rate was much higher than in individualist, with this sort of frame. But if individualist, you said if you wash your hands, you will spare yourself, those and those diseases, and also, some money, because you will have to be absent from your work. It will cost you medication and so on. Then the response rate was much higher in individualist culture. So it depends on how you frame your. So this is the example of the local context and culture being a mediating factor.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Because we have many comments in the chat and a couple of questions, and I just think that perhaps, Susan, if you're okay, perhaps we can start, posing some of the questions and see if then you see that you will be addressing to them later on in the presentation, you just say it, but just the question. So Rosana, for example, Susana Mendez, she says, what have been the most effective statistical, methodological, and contextual criteria you have identified to determine when and where to implement behavioral science interventions in a scalable and sustainable way, especially considering the robust evidence on effect, heterogeneity, and the crucial importance of context moderators highlighted in recent studies on the scaling of behavioral interventions in educational and organizational settings. So it's quite a very thorough question. Do you want to address it?
Yeah, well, the short answer would be this is $1 million question, so impossible to answer. If I understood it, it's the educational setting. It depends on for what purposes. Is it student enrollment, student performance, attendance, and so on. So there is no single answer saying this BI is the most effective and should be used in combination with those effects. As I said, it depends on the local context, on the organization, on the specific task and goal that you want to achieve. Most commonly, so most studies that confirmed that risk aversion versus gain prospects. So that's one very powerful way of motivating better responses. So if you don't do something, this is going to be your risk, your loss. So avoid that loss, right? So that's one. Even though there are some examples where loss framing is not as powerful as, for instance, a positive pro-community framing. But in most cases, loss aversion is a powerful. Anchoring points are definitely powerful and confirmed multiple times. And also reminders and simplifiers, very effective BIs. But it's very difficult to say, well, this is the rule of thumb for all various sectors and organizations, right?
Yeah.
I can give you a list of different trials, experiments, different studies showing the effects or even summarizing the effects. And then you can see how they play out across different contexts and organizations. And this brings me back to one important point, and I guess maybe I should have raised it later on, but let me just briefly say, there is one kind of golden rule here. If you want to implement that in your organization, whatever BI, so you need do a pilot project or test it small, and then measure the effects before doing any scaling up. And that's if there is one message across the board from different organizations, people from nudge units, organizations, so on. This is the one. So you need to test the effects in your specific organization, even those BIs that have proved powerful in other settings, in other countries, might not play out in yours. You will see why if you find that the effects are not as strong, because you will dig deeper and maybe do interviews, survey people, unpack the process and understand.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah.
Generic answer, but that is the reality.
yeah, that is the way we walk, okay?
Yeah.
Carolina Ferri also had posed a question. She said, if you could share some examples where behavioral science can be used effectively in compliance issue. I guess when she refers to compliance, she refers to ethical behavior in anti-corruption or anti-fraud, which is more related to us.
Yeah, so thanks a lot for this question. So it gives me a good lead. Right. So I guess the gist of this is you kind of all of you are interested in compliance investigations, right? So
Yeah.
there we go. Yeah, finally coming to that. Now I cannot give you. I would need in my prior consultancy kind of work. I would look into specific organizations and then kind of look into the context and kind of do diagnosis and develop a set of measures, and then we would later on measure the effects of those measures and refine them. Okay, so it depends basically, but I want to give you one systematic framework that will help you think about it. I'll give you very specific things you might do. All right, I'll send you those tables later on because you don't have now enough time. And I know all of us hate very cramped text on a presentation, but we will pick out some if you want to. But those are the three things. So look at this here. So I guess most of you refer to number 3, right? I'm a compliance officer. I'm interested in how I can apply BIs. Or I'm an investigator. I want to know how I can apply those. And that's perfectly fine. And this is kind of probably the most important part of the story. But I just want to remind you 2 more things. One is, you're probably most interested in one. So I want to apply against the people employed in my company or my organization and ordinary citizens. So if you're working in public policy area, there is someone who needs to comply with your regulation. As you said, Mariana, so there is a law or something. So I want to make sure that they comply as much as possible. So the ordinary people and employees. So basically, I want to subject them to BIs and to make them more compliant. So that's what most people think of when they think from the compliance investigation sectors. But there are 2 more levels here. So one is managers and system designers. So senior managers. If you lead a department or the whole institution, you might think about how you can restructure the whole system. So it's not only particular measures, but literally from the physical spaces in your building, will you have certain reminders that will prompt people every time they come in, how they meet other people, and so on. So, and what sorts of BIs will be activated? The way emails are sent, are they automatic reminders, and so on and so on. So you can redesign the system, and also the officers themselves. So don't forget, you have some authority. So you might not be applying your powers ethically. So I'll give you an example. Many public organizations are scared of their National Audit Office, even if they've done nothing wrong. So when they announce an inspection, we want to look into your papers, they really get scared. There are all sorts of kind of dysfunctions and kind of negative effects. So when I spoke to someone from NAO, National Audit Office in the UK, a few years ago, they've already started implementing some nudges. When they send the letter, it's not a frightening letter like, we will come and inspect you and audit your accounts. And if you find something wrong, you might be penalized, you might lose your job, you might end up in prison. But they're reframing it in a more positive way. We want to make sure that all the funds are, put to good purpose and can benefit the public interest and so on. Even if there are some minor breaches and errors, we understand they may not be the result of a deliberate cheating. They might be that's the way things work. People make mistakes, but if there is something serious, then we will take further measures and so on and so on. So even as a compliance officer investigator, you might, and there is a whole range of other BIs that you might implement in your work, all right? Anyway, so think about those 3 levels. And now, what I'd like you to think about, can you unpack your working day routine or kind of the process of your work. This is one example. So for those of you who are present in this call, compliance officers, you might have a slightly different set of tasks. So this is one possible way. What do? You create a compliance framework, you communicate the standards to people, you train them to raise awareness about what they need to do to comply with those standards. You collect some data, monitor them, report breaches. You follow up on that. For instance, you kind of enact certain kind of disciplinary procedure sanctions and so on. And you try to go back to the drawing board to build culture. So those might be, this might be kind of the sequence of events in your daily routine, weekly routine, whatever. And for investigators, slightly different. There's some overlapping elements. You can see that. Now, the point is, you need to think through each of those stages and think about, can I implement a BI in some of those stages in my work? And where can I implement them? You will get this table. Please don't, you can lose your sight if you read too hard, right? But I just wanted to say, so on the left-hand side column, you have those 7 different, let's say, stages tasks. And then you have kind of compliance officers themselves, you have the managers and the users, right? So those are the 3 target groups that I mentioned here, if you remember, okay? So these are some of the examples for each of those, for each of the stages, the BIs that you might use and implement in your work, drawing on different mechanisms that tackle different biases. So sometimes you have the framing effects, pro-inertia, anchoring effects. So I'll send you the tables in the follow-up. You know your job better than I do, and you know its unique nature and the context. So you might be thinking, well, I cannot apply all of those, or applying all of those would be too much. It would be an overkill. But let's say I think that the main issue in my work is communicating standards. Okay, so to my users, maybe I can frame them. I can say, well, 78% of your colleagues, they comply with those standards. They send us those and those reports every Monday morning. When they notice something wrong, in terms of, kind of the ethical norms expected to be fulfilled, they send their reports and so on and so on. So this would be one way of framing them. Okay, or you can say, well, what happened when person X 2 years ago didn't comply with those standards? Well, they were penalized, they lost their job, or they ended up in prison, or they were investigated further, right? So this would be like loss aversion framing. So if you want to communicate it right towards your users, you can implement this sort of BI. And you can do this across those different stages. And the same for investigators. Those are some of the examples, okay? So we don't have that much time. You'll get the table, but you can think through those. Those are some of the examples for you as a starting point. I'm not going to go further.
No, I think it's great. I mean, whatever you have, what you had showed us, because it's really very clear. And one of my questions was, because we were talking a lot about behavior and behavioral interventions, that we in compliance used to talk a lot about tone at the top. I mean, it's like in our dictionary, it's like the crucial, means the key. Everything starts with the tone at the top. And I wanted to ask you, I mean, is it really good? Is it really a good behavioral intervention to have a good tone at the top? And I just saw it on the chart. So at least for managers, it worked. Okay, this is what you listed.
Yeah, you mean the pledges, saying I will be truthful. Yes, it does work. It's always good. So there is one regularity, I would say, kind of repetition helps. So you either use it every time, or if a certain BI has an effect, you need to keep repeating that to solidify the effect. And this is mediated by certain psychological traits, so individuals traits, certain types of personality. The effect dissipates faster than with others. I'm not going to get into psychology, you can measure that through various psychometric tests and so on and so on. Organizational culture is a mediating factor as well. But for pledges, they do work. Also, what is helpful, what's practice has shown, if you vary those pledges. So remember, so routine and routinization, it might be a double-edged sword. So on one hand, you want to implement a routine where someone would be reminded of something, repeatedly. But if you sign the same pledge every time, if you tick it, it's like terms and conditions, or when you go to Google, or whenever you kind of sign in again for Gmail, you have a certain terms and conditions of basically the same text, more or less, so you don't go through that. So if you can vary that, that the effect might be stronger. So you might say the same thing or similar thing through a different text or different visual representation. Then the person at the beginning of the reporting will have more interest in reading through that, and the attention will go up, right? Mm-hmm. Sometimes you can put it in a box with a certain color of letter. You might jumble up, or you might rephrase the wording and so on. You might say the same thing through different wording. If this is coupled with gamification, that would be even better. So gamification,
yeah, absolutely. Susan, there are many questions in the chat. I don't know if you want to read some of them. So for Slobodan.
I want to ask one thing. What happens before going to the questions? How do you manage? Because I'm talking from a medical point of view. Okay, I was thinking of what to explain about hand washing. We have a huge problem in all the hospitals, because doctors, nurses, health people don't wash hands between patients, and we have campaigns and reminders and educational tools and checklists and everything, because that is very important for us. But how do you think we need to manage when we find someone who is not following these rules? Because that happens. Sometimes I walk the hospital and I say, he's not doing that, he's not washing, he's not. What is the best approach to that person in the moment?
Yeah, so that's a very interesting question. So one thing that has been shown to be helpful. All right, so sometimes you really need to escalate to tougher consequences. So one of those would be naming and shaming. So, okay, so we've got you and we've exposed you. We will put it on the notice board. Your colleagues will learn about it. So you will be exposed to some sort of others, disdain, let's say. So that might be a good measure. But what is very important, the perception of fairness for BIs. And kind of repeated studies show that's a very important mediating factor. So you can say at the beginning, we don't want you to go through this stage, but we want to say that if you're caught not washing your hands once or two times, for instance, we will be first warned in private, and then you will be exposed, and then after that, one more time, you will get a more severe fine, salary reduction, or even you might be fired. But even for this exposure to naming and shaming among colleagues, if the person has been forewarned, and you say, well, do you agree? Do you understand the rule and so on? Some organizations, they even give pledges, not pledges, understanding forms to sign. Okay, so I understand that this will be the consequence, and then the second step, the third step, the fourth step. So they take the responsibility for their conduct, and they will not be backfiring against the organization. It will not be perceived as unfair. So they know what will happen, what will be the consequences, and they will be suffering the consequences if it happens a little without, retorting, because it's their fault, and they've already signed that. that might be very helpful. It has been shown to help reduce the amount of non-compliance.
Okay, thank you.
So peer pressure is an important factor, but it needs to be utilized not abruptly, and also it needs to be utilized in a way where the person takes the responsibility, knowing in advance and agreeing in advance that it will be taken. And the medical profession is definitely among those with high peer pressure.
Okay. Well, I'm going to say the question of Garbini. He says that in her organization, they pledge, it's not wrong or bad to have conflict of interests. The important thing is to inform them. Do you think this statement is okay to tell the people at the organization? That is the question. Is okay, or how can he or she improve this sentence?
Yeah, it's very important. So if you so one thing would be if you want to communicate to people, we need you to declare your conflicts of interest, but the very declaration doesn't mean that you will be forced to give up something that you're doing. We just want to know there is a high risk, so we might track down, whether you've got kind of some abrupt enrichment, or kind of we want to track down whether your decisions were being shaped by the people you might be affiliated with, and so on. So if you present, I think it's a good way to communicate in advance. There is no problem with conflicts of interest. There is problem with utilizing that for, let's say, personal enrichment purposes and so on. That definitely would increase the amount of self-reporting and honest reporting, because it does reduce uncertainty around, whether you will be liable or not.
Okay.
If I understood well the question, or the question was how else it could be utilized. I would need to know what a specific conflict of interest policy is, what are the measures when reported, what is at stake, is there any sort of kind of, tougher penalty envisaged or not?
Yeah. There is also another question from Eugenia Bota. She asks, how do you handle the collection of behavioral data vis-a-vis employees' data privacy rights within the organization?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So you want only to aim for those data, for this data that are collectible without breaches of privacy. So, for instance, kind of the number of reports or the quality of reports submitted, or things like that. Now, for investigators, sometimes you can do intrusion into personal data, but it's legally defined. Okay, so sometimes you can open your employees' emails, but if there is reasonable, and usually it's with court's approval, but of course you shouldn't be breaching that. So you need to find a way to measure the outcome of your intervention in a meaningful, or the output in the meaningful way. Sometimes you won't be having like the best proxies, but the best indicators, because it's not possible, but you might think about like second best proxies for that. And this is another story about how we measure. Generally, kind of in public policy, there is this big topic, how we measure the impact of something, the impact of a measure. So you have the outputs, what people produce in terms of kind of, how many cases, but the impact is even further, a bigger number of certain cases, or kind of, if something longs laster or shorter, it doesn't mean that it will automatically translate into positive impact. For instance, if you submit a higher number of reports of suspicious activities, for those of you working in the banking sector, it doesn't mean that there will be more money caught, more laundered money caught, right? So the output might increase, but the ultimate policy impact might not increase. So you need to be very careful about kind of finding measures output and kind of impact measures.
Yeah.
Again, I'm sorry. So I would need to know the specific organization to look into the nature of the work, to kind of speak to the people involved, and then to develop kind of more precise diagnostic tool and kind of suggest concrete ways of doing it.
Yeah, going back to what you previously said, there is no one single definition of a behavioral intervention. You just need to, it has to fit the specific organization, culture, moment, etc. Right?
Yeah, so no one size fits all. So definitely it needs to be on a case by case basis, and a closer look is needed.
Absolutely.
Okay. I have one last question. Analia Cuervo says, repetition is the mother of skill. And I remember I had an article, but I don't remember the citation, the quotation of the article right now, but it says that the same sentence or information must be repeated every 6 months, because they made 3 groups, one with repetition every 3 months, one with repetitions every 6 months, and one with repetition annually. And they found that there was no difference between 3 and 6 months, but there was a huge difference when you repeat the information annually, that people forget. So what do you say? How often do we need to send or make trainings or communications or emails or whatever? What is the best slot of time? I know that this can be very difficult, very different between organizations, but an idea.
It's really very. I would need to know more about the organization and kind of take a tailor-made approach. So sorry, there is no general rule. So I would say it depends also on the resources. So sometimes it's today, 1 week after, 1 month, 6 months, a year after, and then on an annual basis. But in other organizations it's different. But speaking of repetition, I've just brought up this slide again. So this is what it does: availability and recency. So it combines, this is the mechanism, attention memory biases. So you rely on what comes easily to your mind. Through repetition, it comes more easily to your mind. And C, you give too much weight to the latest info. And through repetition, your latest info or one of the most recent info is precisely the ones that you've done through repetition, okay? So basically, what the repetition does. So I was just about to do one big project which is now postponed. So just to tell you, I don't know even the empirical effects myself, but I wanted to explore them. So I wanted to do a set of BIs applied through advanced digital technologies. So XR, VR, virtual realities, XR. So you put people. Okay, so if you want to have less discrimination towards other ethnic minorities or kind of the other gender, virtual reality, you've probably heard of those games, and XR, where you put something and you get immersed as if it's real life scenario. So it's like a very advanced video games in reality where you walk, you can touch things. So you can even put yourself in the shoes of another person, like you can have a different skin color or a different body. So you might be acting in the body of a female as a male and the other way around, okay? So the idea being, once you put people in those positions, people with power and authority, let's say tax inspectors, people working in welfare provision offices dealing with minorities, policemen, all those people applying, authorities that could be abused against minorities. So the assumption is this training will give them more understanding, reduce their biases, and they will be more ethical in their work. So this project wanted to do what? To measure the effect immediately after the exposure, 7 days, a month, 6 months, and a year. And then to see where how it dissipates over time on average, but also the individual psychological traits of those people, how they mediate, right? So some people, they might be more might be more ethical, others not, or some might be more individualistic, others not, and so on. Various traits. So all those psychometric tests. I haven't done that project, so my answer is I don't know yet, right? But once I do that, I will inform you, right? But the thing is, based on some of the studies from psychology and kind of BI effects, those might be highly varying effects, and repetition might differ from sector to sector. So somewhere you might want to repeat in a year's time, somewhere you might need to repeat in kind of every week.
That is, yeah, that is great. I mean, well, I think that unfortunately we will have to close the webinar for the day because we said we will finish 10:30 and it's 2 minutes right now from there. And I want to use this time, first of all, to say thank you, Slobodan, because it's been great. It's been very interesting, and we're all passionate with Susana and everybody who's here in the meeting, because we are part of these regular meetings. We love to learn about behavioral science and what they can bring to our profession, which is actually compliance. And I think we've learned quite a lot today, and we've opened new windows to see through them, and to try to understand how there are many other tools that can be used. And we haven't been trained specifically because of this, because most of us are lawyers or accountants or physicians, and I mean, behavioral science is quite new. But I think that we now have a better understanding of whatever is out there, and can be effectively used in so many different ways. And for that, I want to thank you. And it's, I think, a conversation that has to go on and continue. So perhaps we would love to have you in another conversation in the near future. And also, let me tell you personally that I'd love to learn or to be updated on the results of the project you're running, because it seems to me so very interesting. I haven't thought of that, but really it's a great way to, to try to feel the skin of somebody else, or to be in the position of somebody else, to actually feel and understand what discrimination might be, and how, I mean, the impact that it can have on your perception and your conduct in the future. So it's really very creative. So yeah. Again, thank you. Yeah, please go on.
Thank you.
So I've just left my last message. So if anyone has for their organization kind of any need for any closer assessment, feel free to get in touch. So I would need to understand better the nature of the organization to see whether kind of plans could be developed and so on. For the project, yes, I will let you know. So it was supposed to be an enormous project lasting 3 to 5 years, with a whole range of tools applied. So not only advanced technologies, but also combined with other BIs, from very simple, reminders to other sorts, and also used on mobile phones, other trackers as well. So yeah, I will let you know once it starts. Hopefully, if so that was supposed to be a large European grant. Yeah. So I'm not going to be taking up your time any further. So I've got my email, and yeah, if you have any questions, get in touch.
Thank you very much, and thank you to everyone who joined us today and have the attitude to share it in English, which is not our native language, but anyway, we wanted to learn. So thank you very much for all of this.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
Have a good day. Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye. Take care to everyone.